In League of Legends, damage scaling for many champions is separated out into mainly AD or AP, and it's usually pretty clear what type of champion should be building what. But over the years, many people have experimented with ways to build champions that fell outside of how they appeared to be designed. Those moments when people looked at enchanters or mages and said, well, instead of using their abilities, what if I just right-click people? The results have ranged from game breaking to game losing, from Challenger 1 tricks to brief competitive meta-warping nightmares that force Riot to hit the emergency nerf button. What makes an off-meta AD build memorable isn't whether it just worked, it's whether it shouldn't have worked, but somehow did anyway. Some of these builds had their moments in professional play before Riot nuked them into orbit, others were seen in solo queue for years piloted by players up to Master or above, and a few were so ingenious, so perfectly executed that they become part of League of Legends history, less for what they've accomplished and more for what they represented. This video is about that history. These for me have to be 10 of the most iconic, successful, and absolutely deranged off-meta AD builds that League of Legends has ever seen. Starting off at 10 with AD Thresh. So Thresh is a support. He throws hooks, he throws lanterns, and he throws people around with Flay too. That's very much what he's designed to do, but AD Thresh flips the script on that and said, what if instead of a support I became the marksman instead? The core of AD Thresh revolves around his passive and his E. So when you pick up souls you gain passive stacks that give you bonus AP and armor, and his E Flay has a passive effect where after not attacking for up to 10 seconds, you'll deal bonus magic damage on your next attack that scales with around 200% of your AD, and the damage this does also scales with the number of souls you collected. You put those two things together and with the right items you can chunk squishy champions for well over half their health in a single auto attack. AD Thresh would usually focus on items such as Static Shiv because he's going to need some kind of wave clear, following up with Rapid Fire Cannon for the extended range on that first devastating auto, and then things such as Collector or Infinity Edge for the raw damage and crit scaling. There are alternative more tanky builds too for AD Thresh, but generally when you're going some kind of off-meta AD build, you just want to be cheesing people and trying to one-shot them. AD Thresh has also never really been a competitive pick, but it exists for those rare moments in solo queue when you decide to do something a little bit different just to see how it goes. At number 9 we have AD, or more AD and on-hit Fizz. So this build started to become popular after a series of massive nerfs to Fizz's AP identity. Patch 5.2 hit in January of 2015 and it absolutely crushed AP Fizz. His Q space damage was reduced significantly, his W lost its grievous wounds, and the ability power scaling got completely reworked. But in the light of these changes to tone down AP Fizz, Riot had created a whole new problem, on-hit or AD Fizz. See, his WC Stone Trident now dealt damage based on the target's missing health percentage, so suddenly instead of building Lich Bane and Zhonya's, Fizz players started to build Trinity Force and Blade of the Ruined King and then go straight into tank items. This Bruiser Fizz build spread like wildfire across all regions of League of Legends. Trinity Force was giving Fizz pretty much every stat he wanted. He had always worked well with Sheen procs, he had attack speed for his W, and it just gave him a ton of stats. Blade of the Ruined King added even more on-hit damage that synergized with his W, and then you go into Sunfire Cape or similar other tanky items to round out the build. What made this so annoying to deal with is that Fizz was never really meant to be this tanky bruiser sort of champion. His kit identity had always focused around being super mobile as an assassin. He had his E to dodge things, his Q to constantly jump around fights, and at the same time he was still doing really good damage. This variation of Fizz never really took off too much in competitive play, but in solo queue for a while it was definitely a nightmare to face top lane. And number 8 is an enchanter who had moved from the support role all the way up to top lane, and that is AD or on-hit Lulu top. On-hit Lulu is one of those builds that's popped up multiple times across the league's history, usually when a combination of items and runes and so on align to make a CC heavy top laner work. The core of these on-hit Lulu builds have always been centered around her passive, Pix Fairy Companion. Every time Lulu auto attacks, Pix fires bonus magic damage that scales with AP towards the target, adding on a bunch of extra damage for free. The result ends up being a champion with a surprisingly large amount of damage from auto attacks, built-in attack speed from her W, hard CC and a polymorph, a shield, a knock-up ultimate, and enough mobility to run rings around people in fights. The first major wave of AD Lulu talk came around season 3 or so, shortly after her release. People were already experimenting with this new champion in multiple different roles, aside from her just being obviously a support. This build did start to fade in popularity though, because Riot gradually started to nerf Lulu down so she became more popular in the support role again, but back around season 7 and 8, people began to rediscover the power of on-hit Lulu through items such as Blade of the Ruined King or Wit's End, depending on the matchup, and then going into further on-hit items or more tanky items too. The playstyle of on-hit Lulu has always been super oppressive when faced in lane. You're constantly auto-attacking to harass, and you're just really difficult to trade back into because she has so much CC. It can be a solo queue stomper in the right hands, but it is a risky pick, and you can absolutely be outscaled super hard if you fall behind. At number 7, I have AD Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate has always been one of League's most flexible champions. He's been played AP mid, AP bot, on hit mid, and even briefly as a jungler many years ago, even in competitive play, believe it or not. But the real moment that legitimized AD Twisted Fate in the modern era came with patch 14.2 in January of 2024. This was when Riot gave him explicit buffs to support this build. They added bonus attack damage scaling to his Q, his E's passive, and gave his W's bonus damage a crit modifier too. This made AD crit focus builds significantly more attractive for Twisted Fate. By this time, of course, rapid fire cannon was an item in the game, and it had been for a long time, meaning Twisted Fate could lock in a gold card and have the threat of a point and click stun from 675 effective range. That's just a bit longer than a Caitlyn auto attack. Now for competitive play, rapid fire cannon has kind of always been a thing for TF. He just benefits so much from the extra range, but this also pushed his AD build even further. The result here was a champion that could flex into 3 roles, mid, top, and even bot, all with viable AD builds. And for a brief window in early 2024, AD Twisted Fate was everywhere. Even Faker was picking him up and trying it out. Then Riot nerfed it somewhat in patch 14.5 by nerfing the passive effects of his E stack deck. The attack speed was lowered by 10% at max rank, and the AD scaling brought back from 75% to 20%. That's how you know something was broken when it gets nerfed that hard. Still, even to this day, Twisted Fate is appearing occasionally in solo queue and pro play as a more flexible pick with flexible build options. And I think as long as he has decent scaling and can gold card you from half a screen away with rapid fire cannon, the AD focused TF builds will always be around. And number 6 is AD Katarina. The concept of AD Katarina has existed for about as long as Katarina herself. In fact, I've done a full video on her history, and right when she first began, she was more of an AD champion than an AP one, believe it or not. But as she began to evolve over the years, she turned out to not quite be entirely AD at all and was a bit more of a hybrid. She was one of the earliest champions to make the best use of Hex Tech Gunblade, an item that's been more recently reintroduced to League of Legends. And as always, it has a bunch of AD, AP, and has an on-use effect that does a burst of damage and slows the target. Nevertheless, despite having this hybrid identity, Katarina could go full into AD builds, and in patch 12.12, Riot added on an attack speed scaling to her ultimate. This now meant that items such as Blade of the Ruined King or Kraken Slayer suddenly became way more interesting for Katarina. She could already reset her auto attack with Auto E Auto, but now she had this other synergy too, and depending on the patch, even to this day, AD Cat can find its place within games of League of Legends. For number 5, I picked AD Kennen. Kennen's AD power has always been centered around the passive AD scaling on his W and the bonus attack speed on his E, which was added on a bit more recently. This allows him to quickly build up 4 stacks using his passive, which would eventually stun his target. I think AD Kennen is one of the earliest examples of a competitively viable off-meta AD pick being played, and that started all the way back in Season 2 with a Moscow 5 player named Genja. Genja would lock in Kennen as his ADC during Season 2 and early Season 3, and people thought he was trolling, which was very on theme for Moscow 5 to be honest. They were doing things which were so far out of the meta, no one knew what was going on. But the pick actually made a lot of sense. Kennen has high base attack damage, a passive that stuns after a few auto attacks, and he has Lightning Rush as a great escape tool. But Genja's AD Kennen didn't quite stick around, the meta moved on, Moscow 5 fell off somewhat, and for a while it seemed as though AD Kennen just kind of disappeared from competitive history. And then came along the 2015 World Championship. Reckless from Fnatic brought out AD Kennen during the tournament and played it 4 times, with 3 wins and 1 loss. He used it in the group stage and again in the quarterfinals when Fnatic 3-0'd Edward Gaming amazingly. Aside from that, AD or more attack speed cannon builds pop up in top lane all the time in competitive play. This is one of those champions that's a comfort pick for a lot of players and just has an immense amount of lane priority and can bully super hard. And at a high enough level of play, sometimes winning in lane just does translate to winning the game. And the number 4 spot, I've got AD Sion. So in Season 7, Riot had just introduced the brand new lethality system, a rework of flat armor penetration that now scaled with level. And with this update, they buffed a bunch of items too, such as Youmuu's Ghostblade or the Dustblade of Drakthar. Now Sion had already been reworked quite some time ago, but these item updates gave Sion players a whole new identity to begin to explore. The build was pretty straightforward. You go Youmuu's into Dustblade, sometimes even adding on Edge of Night as well for a little bit more survivability. You weren't really playing Sion as the unkillable frontline tank he was designed to be. You were playing him to all in and just one-shot somebody, and then after you die you come back from the dead and you're still a massive threat that people have to run away from. Seriously, that Sion zombie has hands. The strategy became known as inting Sion, where really you didn't care about your KD, you were just making the use of your kit to do as much damage as possible to towers and to just dive into people and force them to react to you. Beyond that, in late 2020, Riot went and put the perfect item for lethality Sion in the game, Prowler's Claw. Prowlers now gave you access to a dash to close gaps, it gave you bonus lethality, it gave you increased damage. This is everything that Sion could want. You'd then combine this with Hullbreaker as well, allowing you to become a one-man army that had to be respected on the side lanes. And if you only ever sent one person, well, it oftentimes wasn't enough. Riot even started to nerf inting Sion later on by changing how the player bounty system worked, because as fun as it was to play, a lot of people really did not enjoy playing against it, for kind of obvious reasons. And number 3 is not something that's a full AD build, but it was so explosive and so completely overpowered that I think it is worth a spot all the same, and that is Static Shiv LeBlanc. This happened in 2023. Riot had reintroduced Static Shiv as part of an itemization overhaul meant to give AD carries more build diversity. The item granted attack damage, attack speed, critical strike chance, and a chain lightning passive that dealt bonus magic damage and scaled with ability power. On paper, it was designed for marksmen. In practice, LeBlanc players discovered something that Riot had not intended. This item was just so overpowered on her. The synergy was just so effective.
I'm not gonna lie. There's lightning everywhere. The waves are getting one-shot.
LeBlanc's distortion gave her 2 dashes in rapid succession. Each dash was stacking up Shiv's energized passive really quickly. She could charge it to full in a single combo and then proc the passive for a massive amount of wave clear, and even poke on the enemy champion. Within weeks, LeBlanc became a first pick, first ban priority across pretty much every major region. The LEC, the LCK, the LCS, they all saw the same pattern. Teams either locked her in or banned her immediately. Even Faker and Chovy were picking up this version of LeBlanc. Riot though had to respond to this pretty quickly. On patch 13.13 in late June the same year, just over a month after Static Shiv's return, they completely gutted the interaction. They removed the ability power ratio on Chain Lightning's minion damage and significantly reduced the champion damage AP ratio. In the patch notes, Riot explicitly called out LeBlanc and Zoe as surprising users who had turned Shiv into a souped-up Lichbane that created poor gameplay when optimized. The build disappeared from professional play almost immediately after the nerfs, but for that one glorious month, Static Shiv LeBlanc proved that Riot's best laid plans for item designs can be completely upended when players find an interaction the developers never saw coming. And number 2, I have AD Nidalee top. There is a name here that you'll recognize immediately when you think of AD Nidalee, Hotshot GG. The founder of Counterlogic Gaming, one of the league's first big content creators, and most importantly for our purposes, the man who made AD Nidalee top famous between seasons 1 to 3. Back then, Nidalee's kit was perfect for a bruiser type build. Her Q in Cougar form takedown was an auto attack reset that dealt physical damage scaling with both attack damage and the target player's missing health. You combine that with Trinity Force, which gave you a bit of everything, and suddenly you had a split pusher which could 1v1 just about anyone or escape from just about anyone. And Hotshot GG would often go Trinity Force into more defensive items such as Frozen Heart or Sunfire Cape, creating a super annoying split pushing threat. What made AD Nidalee special wasn't just the damage, it was the mobility in the mind games. You had pounce on a short cooldown to hop over walls and chase down kills. You had vision control with traps. You could heal yourself to sustain through poke. And most importantly, you could split push with impunity because back then very few champions could catch up to you when you started running. Hotshot GG's signature Nidalee became so iconic that Riot featured it in his pro player pick video in October of 2012, cementing the champion as part of his identity. They even gave him a shout out during a loading screen tip, saying he was the pioneer of split pushing strats all the way back in season 1. And this build was legitimately good, it worked. He did it in pro play and they won a lot of games doing it. But by June of 2014 everything changed. Patch 4.10 brought Nidalee's gameplay update, and Riot made one critical change that really killed off the AD build here. They converted takedowns damage from physical into magic, so suddenly building attack damage meant your primary damage source in Cougar just didn't really scale anymore. The new kit also introduced the hunt mechanic, which rewarded landing spears and then diving in afterwards with pounce, a gameplay pattern that heavily favoured AP builds where you're focusing on spears before you get in close. This rework shifted Nidalee's identity from a top lane duelist to more of a jungle assassin, and I'd say that's the core of her identity to this day. And at the number 1 spot is probably one of the most nonsensical builds to ever have existed in the game, which makes it equally the perfect choice for the number 1 spot in this video, and that is AD Malzahar. So you'll know Malzahar is an AP mid lane control mage. He presses E on the wave, he pushes out the wave, and then he just disappears for a bit and does it again. But before patch 6.9 in May of 2016, Malzahar had a completely different passive called Summon Voidling, and buried in that passive was one of the most broken AD scalings in League of Legends history. Every time Malzahar cast 4 spells, he would automatically summon an uncontrollable Voidling that lasted 21 seconds. These Voidlings had 100 bonus AD scaling on their attacks, and inherited 100% of Malzahar's armor penetration. But it gets better than that, they grew stronger over time. After existing for 7 seconds, they'd grow larger, gain more health and attack damage, and at 14 seconds they'd grow again, gaining bonus attack speed. A fully grown Voidling at level 18 had over 1000 base health, 100% bonus attack speed, and attacked for 150% of Malzahar's attack damage. And with enough cooldown reduction, you could maintain up to 3 Voidlings all of the time during a fight, and they were absolutely threatening enough that people had to deal with them before they could finally get to Malzahar, who was just sitting way at the back spamming abilities. In fact, out of his basic abilities, 2 of them didn't even need a target back then, so you could just charge up a Voidling pre-fight, no worry. By the mid-game, AD Malzahar was a nightmare to deal with. You could solo Dragon with very little risk, and if you got ahead, you could even look at soloing Baron too. You could put E on an enemy minion, your Voidlings will go for that target, and then they'll just push down the lane for you while you walk off somewhere else. And if someone tried to 1v1 you, well, if you have any Voidlings active, they basically can't. You get hit by the suppression ultimate while they just poke you down. And because Voidlings had so much raw power as well, even early game this build was still fairly decent. You would want Mana Moon for the mana sustain, Black Cleaver to apply armor pen, and then items such as Bloodthirster for the sustain and for the raw AD. But in patch 6.9 everything changed. The mid-season mage update completely reworked Malzahar's passive into Void Shift, which is a spell shield that had nothing to do with Voidlings. His Voidlings were kept however, and they were moved on to his W. Initially they still scaled with AD, but then Riot would change it later on so they only scaled with AP, effectively completely killing the build and making it just not worth doing ever again. But as a little footnote in League of Legends history, once upon a time AD Malzahar was actually a thing, and it wasn't half bad either. And that's the list, what I think are 10 of the best off-meta AD champions in League history. Some of these builds, such as Kennen, Nidalee, Twisted Fate or Static Shiv LeBlanc, saw legitimate success in professional play, whilst others, Malzahar, Thresh, Lulu, Fizz, Katarina, a bit more for fun in solo queue, but at the same time all of them have their place within the game, and they all share that innovation and wish to find a new way to play something, and it only takes one person to look at a champion's scalings after having played them for so long and to say, wait, this scales with AD? And if you want more off-meta info, I've already covered what I feel are 10 of the best off-meta AP champions in this video too. But with all that said, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.